Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Maddison and David Sharrock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello and welcome and again, everybody. So I'm joined today by Dave, as always, and today we have Logan Kelly joining us too. So hey, Logan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Cool, yeah. Thanks for having me. I am the CEO of Waxle AI, an agentic governance platform. Really passionate about creating kind of agentic infrastructure that can do real work that stays in bounds in enterprise environments.
When you think of the governance space around AI, I mean, obviously AI and agents are all the rage these days. And when we think of that governance space, it isn't one we hear as much about, or at least I guess people are somewhat worried about the costs, at least the CFO in most organizations is, because if these things go wild, you can end up with a massive charge, which not unlike the early days of cloud, where people would spend far too much money. We run into similar sorts of problems. So when you think of the governance space, how do you approach talking to organizations about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like AI governance is going to be the buzzword of at least the second half of 2026. Everybody's going to have a governance solution. I already see it on Google. Like every day, there's a new kind of entrant. But it's interesting. Governance means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And in a compliance-oriented organization, governance is one thing, and a more like these cloud companies where maybe they're deploying tons and tons of agents, like cost becomes a thing. And I think the way I see governance is none of that is like separate, because the failure mode in the kind of agentic governance means if you don't catch it, you're kind of looking at potentially customer conversations that went sideways, that you're only looking at the transcript after it happened. You're like maybe emailing Anthropic to maybe get a break on the $5,000 that you spent because this agent went crazy. And so the way we really talk about it is, a layer in between your agents and the actual execution. And I think that makes the most sense to people, not necessarily trying to add point solutions like cost control over here and PII over there, right? It's one consistent layer that you can start to plug in the different, failure modes that, you might have.
And can you just talk a little, I'm just, as you're describing that, thinking that means that the scope of work that the agents are doing is well understood and sort of outlined very, very clearly, so that layer can police it effectively. I mean, you're talking about controlling what that agent's able to do, I believe.
Yeah. The way that we've approached governance, because where this came from is the other company that me and my team have built is actually like an AI, like an fully autonomous AI kind of SDR in that sales engagement space. And so the way we approached governance was, first things that we have to look at our cost and quality, right? But all of the other failure modes and all of the other kind of needs for governance still exist. And so I think if you ask a company kind of to say, understand every single thing that their agent could or shouldn't do right out the gate, I think that's too big, right? And so it's really, let's observe what's going on, and then let's put in place the kind of the first couple of policies. And then from there, you start to look, oh, I need to, check the grounding on this, RAG-based sub agent and those kinds of things. And so I think we've built the kind of interfaces to be able to see that, and then over time have like operational people implementing policies as opposed to engineers running around with their hair on fire.
With everybody trying different things and experimenting all over the place, having some kind of consistent layer. Do you think of it as an authentication layer then? Essentially, who's allowed to do what to where?
Yeah, I think agentic identity management is kind of a crazy space. And so we look at when you think about agentic identity, you have like two sides. So like the authentication and the data access, right? And then you also have the other side, which is like is the agent trying to impersonate somebody, or is the agent trying to, and so you have both, like, is this agent allowed to access this data, which can be like, are they kind of acting on behalf of a particular user? And then the other side is, who is that agent representing? What are they representing to an end user if it's like a chat based, interface? And so I think identity means a few different things in the agentic space that I think we're only beginning to understand how to kind of control that.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to figure out quite a lot of things in that space. It's as we think about how
Yeah.
these things work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing, and that's really where the whole idea of like trying to scope out everything all before you implement governance is, I think it's impossible, right? Because functionality developers can build so quickly, and then all of the other stuff has to catch up with it.
So, is there any sort of principles that you use to keep up with that pace of change? So, as you said, one of the things that we have discussed on this podcast before, but we've also seen, I think both of us, is the pace of change very quickly outpaces any organization's ability to control if those controls aren't somehow, designed with that view. So anything, of course, that includes a human in the loop is automatically going to be a slow gate. But there's also just thinking about how the problems are going to come together, or what's going to happen when people are really given somewhat of a free rein as to what they can build.
Yeah, yeah. So our kind of fundamental belief is, first you need to observe, so you need to have a good idea of what's going on inside of each of the agents, and then the second thing that we believe is auto instrumentation, as opposed to asking developers to continuously implement these kind of checkpoints and sending data to a control plane before it can come back, right? And so the way we see the world is, it's got to be really easy to see what's going on. So if there's something that comes up, single pane of glass, you could see everything. And the second thing is reducing the amount of work that a developer has to do. And so then what we see is developers should build agents intent first. Operations and analysts and product people and finance people then need to have access to be able to see that. So to add something to the philosophy, I think it also means that the entire organization needs to have access to governance, not just the development team.
That makes sense. So the intent piece especially is interesting, because I think one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of what the governance ends up being is, we've got a set of intent, and you're using intent for what the agent's doing, but the intent of what we want the outcome to be being well enough defined up front, and then saying, okay, is the outcome we got the thing that we intended to get? So do the two things match?
Yeah. That's exactly. When we talk about intent, we talk about what does a developer want, right? And then you can kind of get like DAG, the DAG graphs and context graphs and all this kind of stuff. And so we see our kind of governance layer is super important in the kind of development of the agent as well. So you have that visibility to be able to kind of put, like what you were talking about, the kind of what's the intent of the developer, what's the actual outcome, and those mismatches a lot of times go into production, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, you need some form of it's like fail closed gate there at the end, something that says basically, hey, we've got this intent, we got this outcome from the execution of the agents, now we got to make a decision. Is this something that has sufficiently passed our criteria that we feel okay with it going forward, or is there enough here that maybe we should stop and pause a moment?
Yeah, and where that gets really kind of, where that can kind of compound or really go off track is when you start to think about multi-agent pipelines, agents that can delegate to multiple agents that run asynchronously, right? So one kind of poisoned piece of the context could poison, have a downstream effect that, becomes like a multiplier. And so, yeah, like that's where like scoping, we look at scoping policies to like specific agents, delegation, all that kind of stuff. And once again, those are things that until you really see what this looks like on paper, the actual execution, it's impossible to kind of govern, the whole system from the start.
Sounds a lot to me like we've talked a lot in the past about just product delivery and the importance of validating outcomes that you get when some new change goes live, but also validating adoption, that it's meeting the needs and so on. And that's always been something that I'd say the last 20% of organizations, right? Really the top performers deliver on that, whereas a lot of the others have always sort of kind of said, it's good enough, or, we thought this out properly at the beginning and now it's gone out of the door. And of course, with the agentic perspectives, that AI accelerates the pace of change so incredibly before the complexity of sort of, a pipeline of different agents working with one another, so that the problem is still the same, that validation of outcomes and adoption, but we don't have the skill set in most organizations. Do you see that is that a skill that or capability that organizations have when you're working with them, or is that something you're actually having to put in place?
I think we're in a time where we've built our documentation and kind of help docs to be accessible both by MCP as well as building them specific for things like Cursor and Cloud Code and all that kind of stuff. I feel like we're in a time where the kind of acceleration of agents is also creating an acceleration of coding agents and all this kind of stuff. And so I think what we're seeing is the best organizations are the ones thinking not in terms of, do I have humans who have the skill set to do this thing? They're saying, do I have humans who have the skill set to kind of leverage agentic coding and this kind of stuff? And I'll tell you, I'm sure you guys have worked with ChatGPT and stuff and lots of AI tools. It's like the better you get at asking the questions, the more you learn, the faster you learn. And that's like really where competencies in organizations, I think, are getting filled in by people 2 years ago you didn't think would be able to do that job. And so to answer your question, when people start to see the data, when you start to see the kind of what happened, then I think it gets pretty easy not to think through it yourself, but to say, hey, here's my code, here's what happened. What's the kind of things that I can do? And so I think if organizations have that competency of, I know how to leverage AI tools, that gap disappears very quickly.
I think some of that often comes down to the amount of trust that the people who are playing with this have. And as you say, that builds up with time too, as the more they play with, the more they trust that what they're getting back is actually going to deliver. And I think we also see that happening more broadly in the industry as well.
Yeah. I think using AI tools is its own skill. It's funny. I get on with real smart people, and they think that AI is just going to get you to the end result. You're going to have it refactor your code or rewrite your docs like 5 or 6 times, right? And so, yeah, it's like the more people realize that it's not, you're not going to get single shot perfect stuff, the better off we are.
Yeah, I was playing with a new version of a couple of pages on our website this morning, and having a lot of fun with that very problem. Yeah.
As you're describing some of these, I'm just trying to think of what is the most common scenario that you're seeing when you go and talk to an organization that's thinking about governance. And maybe part of that is, where is the call for getting governance put in place coming from?
That, I think, depends on kind of what the failure modes that the companies are the most worried about, right? The earliest thing is cost, right? But I think cost control is going to be a cliche, right? If you're not controlling your costs, you're just irresponsible, right? I think there's going to be a point where it's not, oh, AI went crazy. It's like, yeah, it's a tool you're using, right? You get a hammer, if you smash your hand, that's your fault, right? But I think then it comes down to a couple of the big places are, if we're using code-based agents, whether they're executing code in a coding agent or they're executing code to kind of debug things in real time, like with some level of autonomy. There's kind of the how are we ensuring that those code executions are not kind of at the going to directories that they shouldn't be in. And it's funny, things like Claude Cowork, for example, it's executing a lot of code to like traverse the directories and all this kind of stuff. So like it's not just code execution isn't one of those things that's a concern just for developers. It's a concern for these agents that are constructed that might be used by more of the business folk. And then one of the other kind of big things is like PII leakage, right, or IP leakage into prompts, and then all of a sudden you have this memory and you have this observability logging that's not redacting the credit card number that one of the users copied and pasted, right? And so that kind of like, are we able to audit something? So are we, logging it, but then also what's actually in those logs? And should there be stuff that, nobody should be able to see after the execution?
Yeah, those are all really good points. There's all sorts of wonderful, fun new failure modes that we start to encounter with some of these things that have you been running into situations too where other parts of the system start to fail as a consequence of people have come in, they've introduced, say, AI into the coding practices, and then the common one is everyone's talking about like, well, pull requests go out the window because why are you looking at the code anyway? How are we then validating from a governance perspective, and which I think may take us back to that intent and outcome piece, but what's your perspective on that?
So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go there. I think if we look at like code quality or we look at other parts of the system failing, right, that might be connected to an agent, one of the most dangerous things with that is like if you have an agent start to retry things, or you have these iterative loops that can't exit, and that could be like a token burning thing. And I think that all comes down to if other parts of a system are causing an agent to have errors, those errors can be quickly compounded, whatever they might be. They could be quickly compounded. And so that's like part of governance is how many times do you let an agent try to retry something? What's the timeout, right? These kinds of things are in kind of cloud SaaS, like an API endpoint fails, the user might try it a couple more times and then they're going to go away. With an agent, though, that could be, hammering your backend server thousands of times before you realize what's going on. And so, yeah, I think that's part of the kind of harness of governance is like, but I think that's where having the ability to kind of tighten up the harness to, harden up the agent to external kind of connected sources failing, whether that's internal or external, is a huge piece of governance that can really save costs, save, servers, expanding when they don't need to, et cetera.
And I think that really talks to what you were saying earlier on about AI agents not being owned in development. I mean, they're everywhere. As an organization gets comfortable with this, there's going to be agents being built at anybody who's got a desktop and has some form of access to something that helped them build it, but also presumably even replacing agents within an agentic flow with something that's been cooked up on somebody's desk somewhere just to get that right for them. So these introduce a lot of room for misinterpretation and so on. So you're describing, I'm just trying to imagine that role of a desktop developer somewhere in the organization that's not really a developer or wasn't until 2 weeks ago. What hoops do you expect them to be able to go through? Is that centralizing the agentic systems that they're using to create the agents themselves? Is it some other mechanism? How are they kind of able to integrate into a system that's not going to harm the organization?
Yeah, I think that's where you have this cascading kind of idea of governance, right? So, if there's a developer's using it, I think in any governance, one of the problems is when people operate outside of the governance plane, right? And you see this with access on virtual machines. Somebody just logs into their email from their personal computer or something. nothing the sysadmin can do about that. So I think where the kind of ideal world goes is like you have this kind of say it's Claude Code, and you have an enterprise that's using Claude Code. So Claude Code gets instrumented with Waxle. That becomes a central, or whatever governance you're using. So now when the agent is being developed, part of the quality governance is this instrumented with our governance tools. So now that's where like auto instrumentation comes in, and you say, okay, this person who's never developed an agent in their life before, the 3 lines of code that auto instrument the thing, now at least we have some visibility. Maybe it's not as granular as a production agent, right? But maybe it has enough surface area to manage file access and token costs and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's really kind of federating the first layer of governance, which is where are these agents being created, and then from there, if that governance has the kind of auto instrumentation capability, then I think it gets a lot easier to downstream, ensure that at least nightmares are not happening without people seeing it.
And it sounds to me like you're not putting too much of a barrier to exploration, which is, of course, one of the other things is anytime I have to jump through lots of hoops to try something, I'm either not going to try or I'm going to work around it.
Yeah. I think the worst thing you can do in governance is, especially in the agentic world, when there's so much cool stuff that you could move on to, is, make it so a developer has to keep on adding stuff, because a developer is not going to, and then a kind of an end user who's like messing around with an agent to make their job easier is definitely not. We always ask ourselves as we're building this is like, is our SDK working for the developer, or are we making the developer work for the SDK? And if the answer is developer has to do stuff, that's probably a place that is going to be a governance gap.
How do you deal with the security side on these pieces, where we've got things like vulnerability management and AppSec, and we're going to do scanning, and we're not going to allow it past this gate? When you think of we've been talking a lot about like the governance of the agent pieces, but often they have to flow through other systems as a part of that. Do you incorporate that into, hey, this was done right, as a part of the governance?
So like a pre-deployment checking of the agent. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So we have a CLI tool that can, and we do this to all of the agents that we build internally too, where part of our actual deployment pipeline is validating, things like, loops that aren't going to operate infinitely, that don't have policies as a part of it, that kind of stuff. So we're not like Snike, and we're not, gonna go in and say, oh, LangChain has a vulnerability. What we're looking for is, are these instrumented properly so that, terrible things won't happen? And we've found a lot of patterns, and we're constantly obviously building different agents using different frameworks to pick up on those patterns, that we can at least warn people in those CI/CD pipelines that, hey, this is something you should look at maybe before it goes into production.
That makes sense. Any more questions, Dave?
I was just going to ask Logan, what is it that the perfect problem comes to the table if you get onto a call later on today and it's just like, this is exactly where we're most excited to help out? Is it anything specific you're looking for? Because we've talked a lot about just a range of different things around agents and using the coding tools and a lot of that, but you're probably at the cutting edge in a couple of key areas. I'm just wondering what you're looking for. What's the nice, exciting project that you want to get your hands on?
The exciting project for us, I think, it comes down to two phases. First phase is the company out of the kind of experimentation phase, and the second is there high stakes in their agent going wrong, right? That could be, things like data, kind of data leakage. That could be quality, but it's these places where people are really kind of intense of like, our agent cannot do this, right? And those are the developers and the engineering teams and the operations teams that when we talk to them, it's like night and day, right? Oh, this engineer has spent so much time trying to build the guardrails at the agent level, right? But things like, but if you could just put the harness around it in 3 lines of code, we can blow people's minds, right? And so I think that's really where that kind of high stakes, we can't have this happen. That's where we can kind of show our magic the easiest.
And could you define getting out of the experimentation phase? That was your first need, right? So
yeah, I think it's, you might be ready to, the kind of internal, kind of organization has said, yeah, this agent is doing the stuff that we needed to do. You might already have it in production and then start to see some of this stuff trickle in, or you might be, yeah, we could launch this next week, right? And those are the kind of that kind of phase, or it's completely in production, and then we definitely need to get this going, but kind of on the other side of the like, can we make it do this thing, right? Because that's where you don't really want governance kind of in the way. You want to be able to run and have fun with the building agents, which is the coolest thing ever.
So it's that sort of innovation phase. You don't want to get in the way there, but as soon as they're lining up production, it's like, okay, let's make sure it works.
Awesome. Well, I think we're getting to the point of the day where we normally wrap up these conversations. So thank you so much for all the input, Logan. So normally at this point for our listeners, we like to sum everything up with 3 points for them to take away. And as our guest, Logan, I'll let you go first. So what would you like our listeners to take away with them today from our conversation?
Yeah, I think we'll go back to what we were just talking about. I think agents should be, innovated and, and had fun with in an organization, see that they can solve so many different problems, but not to walk past governance before you launch the agent in production.
Dave?
You're going to leave me with one there as well. So, Peter, Logan, thanks for the conversation. I really picked a few things up. One of the key takeaways, I think, from my side is part of my head still sits where governance is painful. It's the thing that takes the fun out of the room in some ways, which I recognize is a very old attitude, perhaps. But I think it's also in agentic flows and AI in general, it can get the hackles up of the people who are responsible for it. So what I've really appreciated about the conversation is the sort of ease with which it's kind of layering into the work that has to be done, which is, I think, a great reminder that this can be a conversation. It's not a halt or a gate or anything like this. It's just how on earth are we going to make sure that this is safe when it's in production?
Well, I think for mine, I liked your discussion around you look at every new feature you're introducing as I think this kind of builds on what Dave was just saying as being, how is this going to impact the developer? If the developer is going to have to do work to implement this, then it's probably not the right way of implementing it, or there may be we need to go back to the drawing board and think about what is it we're trying to do here. So I do think that's a very good piece around governance for sure.
It was a great conversation, guys. Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both as always, and I look forward to next time. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Logan. Thanks, Peter.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Pete Maddison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.